And I thought the world was over. I'm like, I don't have a job lined up. I don't know how this is going to play. Like
Yeah.
in my opinion, failed bigger than I've ever failed. Well, there's an FBI story in college related to Beanie Babies that was a pretty colossal failure that we don't have to get into
Another
now, but
episode.
another episode. But it was one of those things where I really thought, like, this is the end of the world. My wife's pregnant with number 4.
Mhm.
Like, I don't have a backup plan. I don't have money in savings for this. Like, this is the end of the world. And you know what? I recovered from it.
Mhm.
And so it was one of those things where it was a really powerful reminder that it's like, you're gonna fail. And you may fail, and in the season you're in, you may think, I have never failed worse in my life, and I don't think I'll come back from this. But we do.
Welcome to the Skilled Dad podcast. This is the podcast for dads of all seasons to learn the things that they can do and engage so that they can go and equip the next generation for success. Here we sit down with everyday dads just like you to learn from their story, get inspired, and then start getting after it. So we invite you to join in, see what you can take away from this story, and apply to your life on your journey to becoming the Skilled Dad.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Skilled Dad podcast. My name is Zach Reeser. I'm your host. And if you're joining us for the first time, I want to say welcome. And if you're coming back for more, welcome back to the Skilled Dad podcast. Audience has been growing, been getting a lot of great feedback from a lot of you guys on some of the different stories that have come out, as well as some things that you want to hear going forward. And I love that. That's what this is about. We're building community among other men. And also I'm hearing about some conversations that a few of you have gone out and done and pulled I'll call it the awkward, I like the way you dad move, which is you see somebody doing something awesome and you just go and show them some encouragement about what they're doing as dads. And it's always, so far, it's been really good outcomes. So you might get that one where it's like, that was weird, but keep it up, guys. That's what we're here to support each other. And speaking of supporting each other, I've got a gentleman here that has a laundry list of awesome things that he's doing. And he and I got a chance to catch up a few weeks ago. And here we are. He's a fellow podcaster, a fellow dad. He's also an HR executive. And I love what he says is, and now you can tell me, Chris, if I get this wrong, but you
Yeah.
bring your skills together and you help people meet at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Is that right?
Yeah,
Nailed
that's
it.
right.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the human experience and where we all meet together as dads. But I've got Mr. Christopher Lind on here with me in the SkilledDad podcast. Thank you for joining me, sir. It's great to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me. And by the way, as part of that intro, I love that you encourage your dads to go say, I like the way you dad. I think that's such a cool thing. And I think we need more of that where we just are willing to encourage people in a positive way. And I'm sure, like you said, there's probably somebody who gets the awkward, like, what was this? But I think in general, we don't have enough of that where people are going, you know what? Good job. You're killing it. Keep it up.
I appreciate that. Did I tell you that story? Do you know where that came from? All right, I'll give you the high level version, both you and those that are joining for the first time. So it happened, randomly, like a lot of interesting things do. But a couple years ago when I was starting this thing, I was working in a coffee shop and I happened to be sitting next to my barber outside and saw this guy sitting over there with his 2 kids and his wife. There's a third kid hiding, but they're just having fun. They're doing some really it was just a cool vibe.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I want to go and introduce myself, but also just like encourage him and tell him he's doing a good job. So I went up, I said, hey man, I like the way you dad. And he's a lot bigger than I remembered at the time.
Yeah.
He's a big guy. And he like looked at me like, who
You're
are
like, oh
you?
no,
And
was
what
this a
the heck?
mistake?
Yeah. So apparently I was so, jazzed up enough that I didn't really care. I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
it'll work out. So introduce myself and I say that and he's like, thanks. and it's still kind of like, this is weird.
Yeah.
So we talk, and they were in town visiting from another state. And I was like, hey, yeah, I'm building this platform. This is before really anything launched. It's like, I'm going to be building this platform for dads and, just things that we can learn and build community. Cause I think that's important for us so that more people can do like what you're doing. And he's like, oh, that's cool. I was like, yeah, if you're ever interested in being on the podcast, let me know. He's like, yeah, okay. And I gave him a card that I had. So anyway, 20 minutes later, he rolls back by himself. And again, he's big. He's like, what is he, like 6'2", 6'3"? I am not that. So, and he's stocky. He's a former SWAT
Yeah.
cop. So he rolls up and he's like, hey man, can I talk to you about this thing? And he's kind of serious. I was like, ooh, yeah, sit down. Let's talk about it. So anyway, he asked some questions around it. And by the end of the conversation, he's like, I want to be part of this. What can I do to be part of it? I was like, I don't know yet. But 2 years later, Brian is his name. He's become like one of my best friends. We talked nearly every
That's
week for
awesome.
the last 2 years. And it's just been really cool. And then one other quick story, just so that I can give encouragement to the listeners that even though it seems awkward, the outcome's usually really good.
No.
Is I have these little stickers that I created. And now I kind of use it as the icebreaker just when you see it or just give somebody something when they hear about it. But, these stickers that SkilledDad. And I was in an airport on a layover going to Phoenix or something like that. And I was in Austin. And there's this guy sitting over there in the food court. I'm looking at the menu for my kids to see what we do. Ended up 5-hour layover because of delay. So that was, party time. And he's just got this little, probably less than a year old, just, rocking it and all
Yeah.
that, flying solo. And I rolled up to him and I was like, hey, man, I just want to let you know you're doing a good job because he looked stressed. I was like, hey, you're doing a
Yeah.
good job. And he looked at me. And again, I thought I was going to get beat up. That's okay. It comes with territory. And he goes, "Ah, thanks, man. I'm really trying." And I was like,
Yep.
well, you're doing a good job. And I gave him the sticker and he was pumped. And his wife walked up and she's like, what's this? And she was like, all happy. At the end of the day, everyone needs a little love and encouragement
They
when it
do.
comes to their dad skills because we don't get a
Well, and
lot
I
of that.
think no, we don't. And I think, man, I can only imagine that probably made that person's day or week because, like you said, you don't hear it. And all the guys I know, they're just trying their best. They're trying so hard to just do their best. And
Yeah.
nobody ever says, you know what? You're crushing it, man. Keep it
Yeah.
up. And that kind of stuff, that's like putting nitrous in your tank. You're just like, okay, let's go when
Yeah.
somebody says that. So I love that you're encouraging people to do it. And at a time when, man, we are more divided and mad at everybody all the time, just going up to somebody and going, you know what? I see something good in you and I just want to let you know.
Yeah.
Ace work. Keep it up. That's not awkward at all. I think we need more of that.
I love it. It's awkward if you've never done it, especially to strangers. It can be, depending on personality. So go try it out, guys. If you want some stickers to give to people, holler at me. I will send you some so that then you can start handing them out to people just as
There
an
you go.
icebreaker. But speaking of putting some nitrous in your system so that you can go and show off your dad's skills, you got 7
Yeah,
kids.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're all like give me the
Young.
range.
So the oldest just turned 13, and then it's 10, 8, 7, 4, 2, 1.
Nailed it. You're busy.
It takes me a little bit. I have to think about it because there's so many of them. Usually I get the names right, but the ages, if you ask me the birthdays, just forget it. Google Calendar has to remind me of that.
I think some of us do that with, 3. So you're doing okay. So you've got 7, your lovely wife, and you're an HR executive in that space. You've been in the tech space. You've found this niche that you can bring people and technology together. And then you're also using that for a podcast called the Future Focus Podcast.
Yeah.
And you do your own editing. We've talked about that. Like all
Yeah.
of these things, that's a lot of time. One of the things that comes up a lot is, I don't have the time. So
Yeah.
maybe, let's start with whatever you want to fill us in on, some of your background and just some of your story. And then maybe just camp there for a little bit on
Sure.
some things that you've learned because we all hopefully have some aspirations we're driving towards.
Sure.
and maybe we can learn something how we can take away and
Okay.
do it ourselves.
So in terms of at least a little bit of the background, and you ask whatever follow-up questions. I told you I'm an open book, so there's
Hmm.
nothing off limits for me. But so I had a really rough upbringing. So I did not have, like you look at my LinkedIn or something, you'd be like, oh man, he must have had a really smooth
Mm,
path. And that was not the case. And at the time it sucked big time. But like now looking back at it, I'm like, okay, like that forges you in a different kind of fire.
mm,
And so, that definitely contributed to it, but also something else not related to the downside of things is I grew up around a funeral home. So my dad was
mm.
a funeral director. My stepmom that he married when I was a teenager was a funeral director. So I was around death my whole life. One of the things it does do though is you are keenly, keenly aware that your time is limited
Yeah.
and that you only have so much. And like one of my best friends died as a teenager. Death was very much around me where you're like, yeah, cannot guarantee that tomorrow is happening for sure. So I think for me, I was always really aware of the fact that how I spend my time
Hmm.
matters. Now, I mean, there definitely were seasons that I definitely would look back and go, maybe I shouldn't have clocked that many hours on World of Warcraft or something like that. It's not like my whole life has just been disciplined with time, but I think especially as I got older, I just really was like, okay, look, we're all given the same 24 hours in the day.
Hmm.
So how I choose to spend it matters a lot. And I think that has really formed me. And then again, when you've got as many kids and as many things going on, you just have to be really intentional about your time because if you're not, you won't get anything done.
Well, do you ever, I mean, we'll talk about maybe some of the things that you do because we just went through
Yeah.
that list. Oh, and you're writing a book too. Missed that
Yeah.
one on
Yeah.
the list, but I mean, that's a lot. And I'm just going to be real with you here. There's times where, yeah, you've done your morning routines, you go to work. It doesn't matter what role you're in, leadership or not leadership. Get home, you go to baseball game or get baseball practice, make the lunches for the next day if you got the littles that aren't able to do that yet. And then bedtime routine. And then you're like, yep, I'm done. I'm ready.
Yeah.
But you still have your goals. You have your things that you're working towards. You have the whatever your book is, whatever your podcast is, or whatever that is that the you as a listener has, you still have things that you want to go and achieve. So what are some of the things that you have going on? What are some of the things that you found in that intentionality that you've been
Yeah.
able to do that helps you get these things done?
One of the things that I would say is I'm very intentional about making sure the stuff that is most important, I schedule time. So people joke a lot. They're like, dude, you live off your Outlook calendar. And I'm like, I
Mhm.
do. Like, even my dad will be like, hey, can I give you a call this week? And I'm like, here's my Calendly, dad. He's like, really, to call you? I'm like, well, you can try and call me, but I'm probably not going to answer the phone if you just
Yeah.
call me. Like, I have times where things work and maybe you'll catch me, but chances are you won't. So I think that has helped. I say no to a lot of stuff, and that's something that's really hard. And I
Mhm.
had to learn over time. There's a lot of times where people really good ideas. Hey, Christopher, we'd love for you to come to, you know, Ireland and come speak at this thing. And it's like, nope, that sounds amazing,
Right.
but no, I'm not going to do it. And I think saying no has actually been one of the most powerful tools
Mm.
that I've had for saying no to good ideas too. Like, I think a lot of times we're like, yeah, it's easy to say no to things we don't like. But for me, there's a lot of things where I'm like, I would love to do that. But from a prioritization standpoint, it's not about me. That's
Mhm.
one of the lessons I've definitely learned as a dad of 7 and a husband. It's not about me. And
Mhm.
so there's times where I'm like, oh, I would
Well,
really like to do that, but no.
that's we'll see. You kind of answered it. Is we don't necessarily want to say no just to say no. I think,
No.
but you've determined what your yeses are, right? You've determined what your vision is, and here are the things that get you towards that vision. And then anything outside of those, if they don't fulfill the vision, you at least have a gauge of what to say no to, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. No, very much so. And
Yeah.
what's interesting about that is I'm also very intentional about revisiting that,
Hmm.
because I'm sure you or anybody listening can relate to the fact that over time, first of all, one, life changes,
Hmm.
but two, you kind of start to acquire stuff. And over time, that starts to be a burden. And so there's lots of times where, usually at least once or twice a year, I'll come back to it and be really thoughtful about, okay, what am I doing now? What is my vision still? And have things changed? Do I need to shut some things down? And a good example of that was just last year. I had a whole thriving community going,
Mm,
several thousand people going. And I went, this isn't really where I am going anymore. And I need to turn this off.
mm,
And I remember the number of people who were like, you can't do that. Oh, why would, and I'm like, I know, and I know it's disappointing to some of you, but let me explain to you what's going on and why I need to say no to this now. And that
mm.
was really hard,
Yeah, I
but
would imagine.
it gave me the freedom to go, okay, but now I have room to add some of this other stuff that is more important to me into the mix.
Yeah. Did you hand it off to someone else to like kind of take over? You're just like, no, pulling the plug. You guys figure it out.
Well, the thing was, is it was one of those things where like I had started it, I had this vision for it, I was paying for it, it was paying for itself now. And then it was just like, it just didn't make sense anymore.
Hmm.
And I guess I could have handed it off, but it wasn't something where the community members really went. It was one of those things where people go, I love it. You can't stop doing it.
Hmm.
And that was hard because in some ways it was like I felt like I was letting people down, but I
Hmm.
also had to go, but I have to let some people down so I can hold other people up. And
Right.
that's just it's a prioritization exercise.
Well, you said every 2 years is what you do to kind of go reevaluate your
No, twice
vision,
a year.
or twice
Usually
a year.
twice a year. Yep.
Okay. Well, that's good. Because, yeah,
It's
we
like going through
absolutely
the
change.
junk closet, you're like, "Okay," like, "Oh, yeah, I don't wear that shirt anymore."
Are you familiar with this was big a few years ago in the ladies circles, and guys, if you
Oh,
were
yeah,
into
the
this,
"Is
there's
this
nothing wrong.
bring me joy?" or whatever, that one?
KonMari,
"Does
you
this
hold
bring
it in
me
your
joy?"
hand. Does this bring me joy? No. Toss it.
No.
But then the next week, I'm like, where is that thing? It brought me joy in the moment, you know?
Yep.
So you go and KonMari your vision every.
But that's why my book is written, but it's not published. I had a vision to write it. I woke up in the middle of the night and I knew what it was, and I spent the next 7 months writing it, and then I was like, does the vision conclude with publishing right now?" And I went, "Nope, it doesn't." So it's
Not there
written.
yet.
I have a PDF. I share it with people who ask about it because they're really curious. The book is relentless intention, and they're like, I just have to hear the stories and all these things. I'm like, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
give it to you. But I'm like, are you going to get it published? Mm, probably someday. I mean, I told my wife if I die, please publish it for me. Just throw it on Amazon or something. But, for now,
It's not ready. It's not ready to be revealed except for the select few, sounds like.
yeah, the people who ask,
All right. Any publishers out there that, want to just dive in and help Chris
there you go.
publish it out? The Relentless Intention, that's a good title. But
Yeah.
the intention around time, and there's something you said too, like we all have the same 24 hours in the day. And this was discussed a few weeks ago, probably at the time of release of this thing when they'll come out. But with the same amount of time per day, what I've found similar to money, right? If you don't have a budget for your money, then your money can just go and you're like, where's my money going? Because you don't really know.
Yeah.
But time is the same thing, and having a time budget. And that's what you're doing with your time blocking with your calendar. It sounds like is like you're budgeting your time and giving it a name and a purpose and an intention based upon your goals and priorities.
Yeah.
Right. So you use Outlook for that, and Calendly is that your magic mix?
Yeah, yeah, because again, if it's on my calendar, then I can set up and again, because I'm a tech guy, I'm
Mhm.
always looking for ways to automate and streamline stuff. I always have an executive admin,
Mm,
but it's weird asking your executive admin to manage your personal time. So I'm like, I'm not going to
sure.
do that. And so, but that was eating up a lot of time because I'm like, well, I've got 4 different calendars that I'm looking at and all this other stuff. So I was like, well, Calendly, I can hook them all up. It automatically looks at my schedule. All I have to do is send somebody a link and say, how much
Mm,
time do you need? You find it. It'll
yep.
set up and so I'm like, okay, it made my life more streamlined.
I've got a couple on there, but I
Yeah.
think you're limited to how many calendars you can put unless you go for, a step up.
But I think the thing with it,
I'm gonna
and I
try
think
that.
this is part of
Yeah.
the work thing that I do, the way I lead my teams is a lot of times, and I have to battle this because I tend to have this like, great idea, let's do it.
Right.
But I force myself to stop and like put the work into the front end first. So like Calendly, you could
Mhm.
just go sign up and be like, great, and start sending your link out. And all of a sudden your calendar is just like, and you're like, oh my gosh, now I'm overwhelmed with this. But even
Mhm.
my Calendly, I've taken the time to go, what are the time blocks during the day that I want for certain times? And I have different links for different times. And so it knows these are the blocks on my schedule that are allowed for certain things. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, that took some time on the front end. I had to set it up, make sure that I was intentional about how I wanted my time spent so that I didn't
Mhm.
end up with a bunch of 4 or 5 o'clock meetings on a Friday.
Right.
But I'm like, okay, these are the times that I need. This is when it needs to be done. I don't want more than this many meetings in a single day type of a thing. But then that
Mhm.
way it helps. But I put the time and effort in on the front end rather
Mhm.
than letting it get chaotic and then going, this just doesn't work.
Right. Well, you understand how to manipulate the system too. Sounds like, or use the system so you can set it up. So if you're not tech savvy, there's tutorials everywhere. You probably have a
Right.
tutorial out there somewhere in a future focus podcast. If you don't, hey, there's opportunity. Just
Yeah,
add
there
it
you
to your
go.
list of
I'll
priorities.
do an episode, how to streamline your calendar.
Yeah. But you're right though about, well, that's going to take a lot of time. A lot of things that we do has the work on the front end so that it saves
It
us,
does.
down the road. Just like, again, a little bit of money and investment side of things too. The money we put in now is going to compound and be better for us when we're able to pull it out. So I know that there's different perspectives on that and putting basically the opportunity cost of now versus later.
Right.
And so that's a good example of that when it comes to time. So guys, if you're looking at how you can enhance some of your at least systems, there's a good combo to go try a little Calendly and first maybe start with the calendar if you don't use the calendar. It does help.
Yeah.
It
Even
does
that
help.
can be a start because you've got like, oh, now I got to go do these 100 things. And you're like, oh my gosh, these 100 things are taking more time than I used to spend on anything else. And so I'm always really, I mean, it comes into my style, even with work, where it's like, it's personal. You got to kind of figure out what works for you. Because if somebody just goes, well, Christopher does this, so I'm going to go do it. Well, maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it
Yeah,
won't. Try it out. If it
that's a
doesn't,
great point.
dump it. Like don't do something because a book you read or a podcast guest you heard told you this is the secret. Because the reality is there's no silver bullet. Anybody who says I've got all I mean, I don't have all the answers. I don't even pretend to. I'm like, geez Louise, my life has been a mess in seasons. I got somebody wants to help. Don't find me a book editor. Find me a contractor.
Yeah,
There you
not
go.
licensed where you are, but that's okay. Oh my gosh, you just said something, and then I went down the contractor mindset. But oh, yes, there is no silver bullet. And
Mhm.
the purpose of my podcast is not to give you an exact framework to go do the thing
Yeah.
because you're your own person. Your kids are different. Your relationship with your wife's different. Everything in your life is holistically different than me and Chris. However, Chris has run into some systems or some tools or some things that I'm maybe not aware of. So then I can say, oh, let me go look into that. I know a couple of them listen to this, so we'll see if I get harassed later. In our sales organization, I don't know if you remember this, but we went through this whole training and used the Franklin Covey
Oh yeah.
planners. Remember Franklin
Oh
Covey?
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, the Franklin planners.
oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you had your little day planner and your calendar and you had your
It was
notes
like the
section.
man purse type thing. Everybody carried it around and you had everything
Yeah.
in there.
You can get customized pages, and then every year you go buy new pages
That
and
was their
just
revenue
fill them up.
stream.
Some people just like they had it because they had to, but they didn't use
Mhm.
it. But then when I would ride with them, because I was their leader, I'd go on a ride along with them and then be like, "Yeah, I'm a planner," and showing it off, and I'm like, "You don't use that thing, do you?" "Well, yeah, it's right here." I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah, no, look, see, I
you don't."
jotted something like 6 weeks ago right here.
Uh-huh. I
I
was like,
did.
"Yeah, you don't use that
Mhm.
thing, do you?" I try. I'm like, "Look, I don't care if you use it or not. I really
Yep,
don't. What I care about is that you have your plan and that somewhere you can reference your plan so then you have a gauge to know if what you did was successful to what you planned and
yep,
that you are streamlining your meetings and things like that so that you're effective, which allows you to do better and then have more time to enjoy life outside of work."
yep.
And sometimes there was just like this, really? Like, I'm like, yeah, find the
Yeah.
system that works for you. So same thing applies here, guys.
No,
About
but I think
things,
that goes
do
I
it.
mean, going back to using your time well on that, I use this in HR all the time where when I'm working with the business leaders, it's like, let's get focused on the measurable outcome. What are
Mm,
we hoping to accomplish by doing this? And then let's not get too hung up on how people get there. Let's give people the framework and the tools and the resources to do it, but then give them the freedom and the flexibility to do it. So, you know what? If their schedule looks way different than yours, don't say they're not good at their job because if they're achieving the outcome, does it really matter?
right,
Hey, if it works for you, great. But I think the point that you're getting at that's really important is if you don't know what your target is, that's where you're going to be shooting arrows all over the
mhm,
place, going like, man, I am
yeah,
tired. And you're like, well, looks to me like you haven't hit anything, but you put a lot of time into things.
nailed it. No, that's yes, that's exactly right. And do you guys do OKRs, objectives
Yeah,
and key
I mean,
results?
again, every company's got their OKRs, SMART
Yeah,
goal.
I'm not so sure if
They
they still
were,
are now. The reason I say that sometimes you can get so caught up, and we had strategic
yep,
meetings where we would just go in circles around the thing to do, rather than what are the 5 things that we can go try, or really what are the 3 things that we can go try, and we have a goal of what success looks like. And then we try those and focus more on the outcome. So in this case,
yep.
Calendly, it's like, oh, I got it all set up. This is great. And if getting it set up was your goal, great, you've accomplished that. But now, if you're not going to use it and it doesn't do what you want on the back end, to actually save you time, you just wasted all the time. So
Actually
you,
wasting time.
yeah, you
Yep.
mitigated that goal that you set. And that applies to any of the things. So don't focus so much on your
No.
thing that you're doing, but is the thing that you're doing achieving what you wanted?
Well,
And
and
I
a good example of this, I was coaching a guy once, and one of his goals was he
mm,
wanted to make $1,000,000, and it was a goal. And as I dug into it with him, I'm like, but why?
mhm,
And he, well, because I want to be able to do this and I want to be able to do this. And I'm like, okay, but why? And he kind of kept going on it. And I'm like, yeah, but what underneath it? Like, what do you think you're gonna do when you finally get that million? Like, what
what
is gonna
happens when you
happen?
win?
What
Yeah.
happens when you get there? And he's like, well, I just really want to be able to, spend more time with my family. And I literally just looked at him and I said, they are literally sitting right outside your office door right now.
Mhm,
And you are spinning your wheels trying to make all this money so you can spend time. Just go spend time with them. And it was one of those things where so simple, but because he'd lost sight of the outcome and
mhm,
his outcome had become an activity, he just was missing the forest through the trees, and it's easy, and it happens to all of us.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, he's not alone in that one for
Mhm.
sure. Trajectory when I realized kind of what that I was my means were actually the opposite of the end that I was looking for, even though
Yep,
that's why I started them. And at the end of the day, I think the good takeaway here is what are your outcomes that you want? The real ones, not
the
just I
real
want to have a
ones.
million bucks in my bank. I mean, yeah, I think we will all welcome that. There's something driving you. And once you can figure that out, you're closer to getting in alignment with what you can do. And then you're a tech guy. So I love this term,
Yeah.
test and iterate. Don't marry something, test it. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right. What's you
Well, and
as
I
a,
think that's one of the things as guys, it's sometimes hard to admit like that failed.
yeah.
And instead of being like, I learned something and maybe being a learning guy, like that's one of the where I'm like, what? We're all screwing up. Like, try it. And if
Mhm.
it and you hate it or it doesn't do anything or it makes you more frustrated, you didn't fail. You learned something new and
Yeah.
you let it go and you move on.
Yeah. Well, that is okay. So in your expertise area, let's sit on that one for a minute, and then I
Yeah.
want to make sure I respect your time. Failure. So
Yeah.
that is different thing, different people, and there's lots of slogans around it, and but the fear of failure is a big blocker for people. It's a big
It
one
is.
for me sometimes, even though like I know these things, and then some days I'm like, yeah, not worried about it. Like, let's go learn. And then with other areas, I'm like, yeah, I really don't want to screw up on that one. It is a mindset thing and how we look at it. And I guess, like, what would you say around that? Because it seems like there's levels of failure that maybe we can easily accept with, like, if I'm going to go and try to build something with these tools that some people think this is a fake Zoom background. It's not, by the way. I'm gonna go build something, but it has to be perfect, but I've never done it before ever. And then when I'm
Yeah.
done, it's off, it's out of tolerance by like a half of an inch. And now I failed. I'm not good at it. I'm never gonna do it again. Like there's that, or there's it's out of tolerance. Like I'm gonna fix it. And I'm gonna learn so the next time it's gonna be better and
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah. So I think, first and foremost, and this is more where I'm coming from, like I've got a
Mhm.
moral grounding that is kind of like my first filter on this because you can get into a lot of trouble just going, hey, like what the heck, try anything and see what happens. It's like,
Mhm.
well, you can also cause a lot of unnecessary problems if you're just like, oh, I don't have a grounding that's keeping me grounded in which direction should I be pointed.
Right.
So I use that as kind of a first filter because without that, I would have made a lot more really stupid mistakes. But I think what I've learned, and this goes back to the funeral home thing, is like, you're not going to die. And so, as an example of like a catastrophic failure for me, I remember I was in a really good job at a really great company doing amazing things, and I had a boss switch. And I was running a global organization, and this new leader came in, and I had a great setup with my previous boss. He just knew, he's like, Christopher's the tech guy. I don't know how people in Singapore know him like he's their neighbor, and yet they've never actually physically been in the room with him, but he gets it done. And I don't know how it works, but he
Mm.
has some sort of digital magic. And this new leader came in and just, again, going back to he couldn't see outcomes. He was too focused on the activity. And this gentleman was like, you're going to have to pound sand with me. Like, we are going on a global trip on a and I was just like, where does this sit? And again, it was this fear of
Mm.
failure of like, do I just go along with it? Do I feel like, pushing on this? I'm going, no, okay. And so I remember going, am I really going to be bold in how I do this? And
Mm.
looking back, I probably would have worded things different, but I remember my first one-on-one sitting with him going, here's the thing. I put my kids in bed every night, and that's just a game. It's a non-negotiable for me.
Mm.
So overnight travel, it's just not in the cards. But I promise you I'll nail every outcome that you need to get there. And this guy just looked at me and was like, hmm, let's talk next week.
Mm.
And as soon as he said that, I went, I have made a colossal mistake. This is like the worst thing in the world. And so the next
Oops.
week, I came in and he goes, you're going to change your mind on that or you're not going to be here anymore. Let's
Mm.
just say that. Ultimatum. And I went, okay, how long do I have to decide? And he's like, a week. And I remember just going, What have I like, I have just created a big mess, and ultimately I
Mm,
said, "Well, then I guess we're gonna have to get HR involved." And I thought the world was over. I'm like, "I don't have a job lined up. I don't know how this is gonna play." Like,
yeah.
in my opinion, failed bigger than I've ever failed. Well, my wife's pregnant with number 4.
Mhm.
Like, I don't have a backup plan. I don't have money in savings for this. Like, this is the end of the world. And you know what? I recovered from it.
Mhm.
And so it was one of those things where it was a really powerful reminder that it's like, you're going to fail, and you may fail. And in the season you're in, you may think, I have never failed worse in my life, and I don't think I'll come back from this. But we do.
Yeah.
And I think, especially as guys, we recover. And I think I always remember that whenever I'm like, I'm just afraid if I do this, it's going to blow up. And then it's like, oh, I couldn't go worse than that. So I guess why not?
There is a point to have with discernment, right? I mean, the
Yes.
things that we're doing and having discernment and being thoughtful, but letting that fear of failure completely stop you from all things. I'm right on board with what you're saying, and that we're going to go through those ups and downs, peaks and valleys, whatever you want to say alongside of it. What I would say is that it can be a really, really bad experience, or it can be a tough experience that has the added benefit of learning from, depending on what it is that we can take. I know we range from 25 to 60. If you're just now kind of wrapping around that or being reminded of it, well, that's a good lesson we can teach our kids so that they can learn faster and then they're equipped. The other thing that I throw out and get your thoughts on here is there's things that you can do to insulate some of
Yes.
the negative impact of that failure, and
Yeah.
kind of maybe not create a soft landing, but have a system in place that helps when that happens.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
No.
And then I've got one big one that comes
Yeah.
to mind.
One of the things in that experience, we'll riff off that story. One of the things that made that landing harder and easier, there were some lessons that came out of that. So, first of all, I've always been big on building relationships and making solid relationships and connections with people and organizations that I'm in. And so it just so happened that my mentor was the CEO at this company.
Hmm. That you were part of?
Needless to say, when I sent a message and said, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make our next mentor meeting and explain the situation, let's just say the company made my landing a little bit softer than it would have been had that relationship not been there.
Sure.
Well, I wasn't building that relationship with this ulterior motive of like being friends with the CEO is going to give me some sort of like edge.
Right.
Proactively building the relationships definitely made the landing softer. Now, one thing that made it harder was I had not spent much time building a professional brand, staying connected with people outside the company, things like that. And so when all of a sudden I unexpectedly had to look for a new job,
Mm,
it was really rough. That was a lesson I've learned now, which is why if you see me on LinkedIn, I'm very active. I'm constantly doing things so that, again, can I necessarily prevent a new boss change and somebody going, Christopher, you're out,
right.
and unexpectedly? No, but I have been proactive in doing as much as I can control to say, well, at least if that happens, hopefully I land in a beanbag, not a bed of nails.
Yeah. Love that. Yep. That's the big one I had, is the support system around you and creating opportunities so that you're not fully dependent on that one. Cause it may not be a boss change. It could be the company goes out of business. It could be layoffs,
AI took your
whatever.
job.
It could be that yes, you edited podcasts and then they made an AI editor and it did all the things. Yes. Like
Yeah.
that's, you're the tech. That would be an interesting episode down the future. But I think within the sphere of what we're talking about, like the failure aspect, job, outside of job, marriage stuff. Like if we goof up and your main support system is your wife, but you don't have some of your guys around you to go to, that can be isolating and tough, right? So
Yep.
to help that, and also with what we talked about before of having people that can encourage you, kind of like full circle, when we go up and encourage people, we want to do that. If we've got our
Yeah.
close buddies and we see them maybe doing some things like that, uh, we know what their goals are, we know who they are, and we see some things out of the norm that need a little kick in the pants. That's for us to do too. It's a different form of encouragement, but just to help
Oh,
keep each other in line. Like those relationships and personal branding outside of where we are, I think are also things that we can do.
and I
So
love that
great
you hit
point.
on that because we opened the episode about the positive encouragement.
Mhm.
But like you said, some of those proactive moves you make are also having those people in your life that they know you well enough to go, "What are you doing? You're
Mhm.
being stupid right now. Don't do that." And you're like, "Thanks. Thank you. I didn't want to hear it right now."
Sometimes you're like, get out of here. Don't talk to me right now. You're like,
Yeah.
I know exactly what I'm doing. And then, the next day, you're like, no, dang, they're right.
Dang it. I'm sorry.
Reinforcement. I love it, man. Well, we touched on a couple really good topics, and I know there's so much more we could hit on. Maybe we'll have fun another time, especially once you get your book published.
I'm just an email or a Calendly away.
Yeah, I know your secrets now. I'm just gonna like fill in
That's right.
all the Calendly boxes that you've got. One of those would be like an Easter egg. It's like we're gonna build a deck.
Yeah, you'll find the Christopher hidden link. So we'll just document us like laying the wood floors that I screwed up, going up to
Oh,
failure, where Christopher laid them the wrong way in the house and then found out, oops, you got to go across the beams type of a thing. I guess we got to cut all these up.
this is this is where magic starts to happen. It's like the intersection of skilled dad and technology building
There you
a
go.
really good. We're gonna get hands on. I love it.
Make a master class.
Put it in the Calendly. I'm in.
Okay.
Where can people find you? They want to learn more. They want to follow you, hear more of your stories.
Yeah, I am very active on LinkedIn, so that's usually one of the best places to find me. I also encourage people rather than trying to hunt down all my different stuff, if you find me on Substack, christopherlind.substack.com. If you find me there, you'll find links to the other work I do. So between LinkedIn and Substack, you'll kind of find everything that's going on in my world.
Awesome. I'll put it in the show notes. Are we
Okay.
connected on LinkedIn?
I don't know if we are, but if we aren't, we should rectify that.
We know 5 mutual people. All right. Well, we'll see if you accept. No pressure.
Let's see if you accept. I may have to go again, say no to some of my existing connections and then make room for you because I think I'm at the 30,000 cap.
You get capped at 30,000? I thought.
Yep. Once you hit 30,000.
Oh, really? I thought it was higher than that.
Yeah.
How does
No.
Justin Welsh have like 105,000 people?
So you can have followers versus connections.
Oh,
So that's why
okay.
I have like 35,000 people following me on LinkedIn, but I'm not connected to all of them.
Oh, no, you're good. There's a couple spaces in there, I think. Well,
Okay. Well, that's what I said. I'll
you said
make room for
connections.
it.
It's okay.
That's right.
If not, I'll
Look
still
at this.
follow you.
Accepted.
Oh my gosh.
Accepted. Accepted.
I now have 5 people on LinkedIn. This is awesome. Yes. Magic. Magic in the air. Well, Christopher, it was a blast, and I love what you're doing and love your intentionality. And whether or not you decide to publish the book, let me know. I'd love to read it. But
Okay.
keep up the good work. You're doing some great things. Every time I talk to you, I get inspired. You have great energy. And with all the stuff you're doing, I'm like, I need to have some of that sparkling water that you got going on there. But thanks for being on with me, man. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, guys, if you've listened through this point, I know you've gotten something from this podcast episode, and it's been fun. I love when you can just sit down and connect with somebody and just have a conversation, because that's what I just did. Sometimes I forget them on a podcast, but a couple key reminders for me, key takeaways. Number one, whatever you're going towards, and just encourage you not to worry so much about what you're doing, but evaluate what you're doing and worry more about, are you getting to where you want to be? So evaluate the actions that you're taking, but see if they're getting you closer to your goal. If they're not getting you closer, or maybe you have more things coming in and you like to be a social butterfly, or whatever is coming your way and you keep saying yes, but it's taking you away from the real yes, maybe reevaluate that and find the system that works for you. So I love that takeaway from Christopher on that. The other thing too is as we're going through, these go together. You're trying new things to get to the outcome you want. Some of those things will not work. Not necessarily because maybe you failed, but did you learn something from it? You learned that that thing doesn't work. So let me try the next thing. Don't be afraid of the failure. Step into it, learn those new things, and then take that and teach somebody else. Because some of the best ways that we can learn is teach others. And then finally, if you see somebody out there that's doing some cool stuff, there's nothing wrong with going up and telling them that you think it's cool they're doing that. My experience in doing that is it's really put a light into people. They seem to be jolted, but then alive because someone else came and just saw something they were doing and encouraged them on that. So go do it. And if you want some stickers to give them, I got you. Go to just email me at hello@skilleddad.com. I'll send them to you and you can test that one out for yourself. At the end of the day, if you heard something that made you think of somebody else, go share it with them. I hope that you can take some of these things and apply them to your life and your journey. And I like the way you dad.